Okay, welcome back, everybody. We will now start the second half of our event. So it's dedicated to panel discussions. And before we proceed, as before, I'd just like to remind everybody to set your phones to silent mode. So our first expert panel of the day is titled Racing 150 Trillion Yen Toward Carbon Neutrality. And we have the following expert speakers with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the speakers onto the stage. I'd like to start filling in from that seat over there and then just go, start filling in from that seat there. So moderator. Thank you. Excellent, and you can all see who's who. Great. So thank you all very much for taking the time for this panel today. And so just to introduce, well, we have the name on the screen, but let's start over there with Shinada-san from DBJ Europe Limited. Thank you very much for taking the time. Oshida-san from Manulife Investment Management in Japan. Thank you. Justine Liebel from Anthropocene, thank you very much. And finally, our moderator, Sherry Madera from CDP Worldwide. So, without further ado, I shall then be handing over to you for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Is this on?
I believe it is on.
The light goes on, the mic goes on. Fantastic. Thank you very much for inviting us all here. I had the pleasure of speaking to our panel a few times before today, so I can say with absolute certainty that they are the experts. So my job is to be able to make sure that they have the time to be able to address the room. But the reason I think why I'm here is the fact that CDP is an incredibly proud member of the Japanese climate community. I'm very proud to be sitting on the GX advisory board and being able to contribute, particularly from a disclosure perspective. Japan is the third largest market in the world to disclose to CDP, and by far it has the #1 amount of A-list companies for that disclose to CDP. Why is this important to the discussion we're having today? It's because what you can measure, you can manage. When we're thinking about transition, when we're thinking about how it is that we move capital at scale, we need to be able to base that on the data that has been produced not only this year, but years in the past. And Japan and Japanese businesses and corporates are in an excellent position to be able to leverage that. And CDP is very proud to be part of that community and continue to drive that forward. So without further ado, if I could start our discussion. As I said, we've got 3 leaders here, so it's difficult to find the best way to start. But after our discussion, I think Naoki-san, you're going to take the first point of view. And from the Development Bank of Japan, who has been a CDP discloser for 20 years, tell us about sort of transition bond issuance and how those proceeds will be used from your opinion, your experience, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Naoki Shinada from DBJ Europe, which is a London-based subsidiary of Development Bank of Japan, so-called DBJ. The DBJ has issued the green bond in 2014, which was the first issuance of the Japanese financial institution. And since the next year, we upgraded the bond format and upgraded it to a sustainability bond. And since then, we continued issuing the sustainability labeled bond in every year. We are having the certain experience of sustainable finance in capital market. So in 2024, we issued the transition bond, which is the first issuance of the Japanese financial institutions. But I think it's not a new starting point because we have some background of sustainable finance of capital market. And in terms of our transition bond framework, that issuance is recognized as issuance by the enabler, which means our bank is an intermediate entity connecting with the corporate and market investors. So that's the standpoint is very unique, which is distinguished from the corporate issuers. And in terms of the framework of transition bond, first of all, the user process are very important because the investor credibility is essential to issue such a kind of bond. So our user process limited to transition loans and the transition linked loans, which are reviewed by the external reviewer, the review providers. That is the one of our characteristics of our issuance. And the second one is our transition bond covers the financing and the refinancing. And also the looking back period is 36 months. I mean, we covered the assets we invested in the 3 years, which are eligible to the transition bond. That is our basic framework of transition bond. And and the first issuance of our transition bond was issued in 2024 August. Please move on to the next page. The 2024 August, that was our first issuance. That the amount of that issuance was 10 billion Japanese yen, and with a 5-year tenor. And the second one was issued in August of 2025, the same amount of 10 billion Japanese yen with a 2-year tenor. So we will issue the such kind of transition bond every year. So now we are considering to issue the same format and mostly the same amount later this year. And in terms of the reporting, we have already reported about the first issuance. So the proceeds were fully allocated to 2 projects. The one is transition loan, the 35%, and the rest are a transition linked loan. And we also disclosed the concrete cases of the transition loan. And one of the eligible assets was the project done by the Mitsui OSK lines. They introduced the energy fuel ferries, the certificated with the 5-star MLIT, the efficiency rating. So which contributes to the reducing the SOx emissions to the near zero and cutting CO2 by over the 20%. So that DBJ has a much importance, put importance on the engagement with the investors. So we will improve our format for the future issuance.
Naoki-san, thank you. And we'd love to hear more about that engagement as we speak on the panel. But I'd love to pivot over to you, Justine. When we think about corporates, what is the current state of play from your perspective? Are we seeing that there's an opportunity for scaling up international flows into the bond market? Are we at an inflection point? What's your perspective?
Well, I definitely think we're at an inflection point, and that's governed by everything that has been shifting on the macro that has been highlighted in earlier sessions. And that up till now, I'd say that well, Japan's corporate bond sector, the transition bond sector, they have actually been leading on. I mean, they have literally pioneered this, and I'd argue that that has been partly governed by the government policy, but we've seen some of this even happening before that was embedding itself. So certainly there was a moment of where corporates were seeing this opportunity of, are there investors out there that are interested in investing? But I think that in order to get the international investor base, it is, the journey that Japan is taking is very different from how the European community of investors are looking at transition. And I can dive a little bit more into that. But if we look at some of the numbers, I mean, 97 corporates within Japan have issued, and roughly 50% of the outstanding transition label debt is from the power sector. Right? And that's, shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but mainly the utilities have been taking advantage of this. And it's been a diverse set of issuers. Up to about 11 of the majors have been doing this. So on the domestic, lots of transition bonds, mainly coming out of power sector. Question mark is what's happening on the European buyers, UK buyers, even the US buyers. What we have started to see is some of the utilities stepping out and issuing in USD. That hasn't necessarily been coming under a label, but if you look at some of the investments that they've been raising the capital for, very much fit in line with some of the things that are laid out in the GX policy. And those have all traded very, very well in the market. From the international side, coming back to what is still developing, there has been quite a debate, as we all know, around where transition sits outside of what the Green Label has been. And we had wonderful outlay of the Transition Finance Council over the UK. I love that I kept hearing market-led, because that certainly then is having the industry voice. It's not about putting transition in a box. There's a lot of uncertainty. We heard a lot of that earlier when GX was being presented. And so I feel that we are starting to get to that point where there's an acceptance that transition is not a straightforward, perfection. It is a transition is a process, and the market will price that. And as much as we can also benefit from the label, there are other things that are happening outside of the label that are very much transition related. So we are at an inflection point, and I can elaborate a little bit more on that. But to your point, I think very much so.
Fantastic. Well, Suzuki-san, you have vast amounts of experience as a bond investor. Can you pick up from what the other panelists have been saying? What's your perspective in terms of being able to move capital into this space? Or maybe we're using the wrong nomenclature. How do you see it?
Yeah. Thank you very much for. And first of all, I'm very, very glad to have this kind of the great panel with outstanding the panelists. And thank you for the comments. And I would like to provide our domestic investors' view on the transitional finance. Why the Japan lead the transitional bond market? And first of all, over the last 30 years, that we face the super low interest rate environment. That because the Japanese economy's the growth rate is pretty low, and that's eroded the companies profitability and the growth rate. And the first of all, the transition may make some kind of the boost of the company's the profitability. That means the Japanese company, Japanese economy faces the two unfortunate incidents in 1970s. One is the pollution, and one is the previous oil shortage, severe than now. So the Japanese company has a very advanced technology on the environmental side, and the cutting edge technology will be the one good driver for the corporate value creation of the companies. That's very favorable for the Japanese investor. And second one is that the composition of the Japanese bond market. The total amount of the Japanese corporate bond market is 100 trillion yen. And 20 trillion are issued by the electric power companies. And 10 trillion are issued by the other, hard-to-abate industries, like the chemical, the marine shipping, and the airlines or so. In that sense, the 30% of the bond issued by the hard-to-abate industry. If investors do nothing at this moment, what happened in 2040 and 2050? So the transition itself is pretty important for the Japanese investors. And Justin mentioned the importance of the label. I agree with the importance of the label. That's because we mobilized the 150 trillion yen Japanese yen. And is that the covered by the mega banks or lifers, big lifers? I believe the more small-sized financial institutions' participation is necessary. And in that sense, some companies have the capability to assess the transition finance, but some not. In that sense, the label that help those kind of the financial institutions to understand well in terms of the credibility of the transition. In that sense, to move the 150 trillion yen, some kind of transition finance or label is necessary. That's my perspective.
Fantastic. And of course, if we take it down to the data level, it is important to start thinking about how transition data starts becoming an input into all different types of financial products, of course, including transition bonds. And at CDP this year, we opened our disclosure cycle last week, so hopefully everybody is starting to get ready to do that. But we have also tagged 23 data points that basically build to that credible transition plan that we've been speaking about. So again, it could be a way of actually really starting easing in, what do we mean by credible? How do we actually base that in some of our data? So again, hopefully that's something that we're going to see more and better of, because we know that Japanese companies are already disclosing against many of those, and that can be a really important piece of the puzzle. But Shizuki-san, can I come back to you? We're returning to positive interest rates in Japan, right? This is a different place to be. So this could be a game changer. And as it comes at a time that we're speaking about corporate transition, how does that affect how money is flowing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I've been serving the credit analyst for the 25 years. But during this period, the interest rate going down, or near zero, or the negative. In that sense, I haven't had the foreign investors interested in the Japanese interest rate. Of course, there kind of some kind of volatility, but level-wise, they're super low. So, but the things has been drastically changing. Over the years, the interest from the foreign investors has been drastically rising. So that's the reason that I'm a bit busy right now. So the Japanese investors are not familiar with the world with the positive interest rate. So we have to adapt the situation. But if this is become new normal, I believe that we can expect further development and the diversification in the bond market. That will help to expand the transition bond market.
And yeah, Justine, I was going to come to you. I mean, we talked about when we were talking previously, it's about expanding the investor base for these assets in order to create that liquidity, the volume, the momentum. I mean, what's your perception of what's happening now?
Super exciting what's happening in Japan. I mean, I know in markets we get a bit nervous when we start seeing the yield rise so high on the 30-year, and nobody wants to look at it. But it's going through a normalization, and check back in Japan five years from now, and it's going to be a very different discussion. But bringing it back to the JCTBs, because it is worth noting that up until now there's been a number of issuances that have happened. We had the pleasure of hearing and of that earlier today. But greenium is always this question, is there investor demand? Are there investors that want this product? Greenium is a funny thing because we think about, you label it green, you automatically get this. It's a fluctuation, and especially right now, we're seeing a lot of the greenium flat to zero and not, really giving much. But the latest auction at the end of May with the climate transition bond had its highest on the day of the auction at 4 basis points. And that may not sound like a lot for those that are not in fixed income, but for government debt, that is brilliant. And that's exactly what you want to see. So what's going on there? Well, certainly, coming back to this different rate environment, we've got those that in the investments that are looking for the short duration, so a 5-year, which is what this was, the GX are a 5 or 10 year, this was a 5-year, and it was sitting at 2% yield. So that's something that certainly got attention for some. The other, which, came to my surprise as I was coming off of my roadshow in Tokyo last month, was that there is that JCTBs are now are considered collateral for the BOJ's climate eligible financing facility. So this is something that has been very attractive for banks. And some of the questions have been, who have been the biggest investors in the JCTBs? It has very much been the banking community, both international and domestic.
Fantastic. And Naoki-san, I'm wondering if we can kind of bring it back to you and starting to pivot forward, thinking forward. What is the plans for issuing new bonds? But also, if you could broaden that out and tell us about your thoughts on corporate bond issuances in this transition space.
Okay. Before mentioning the future matters, I would like to recall the something we faced in designing the transition bond, because before coming to the London office, I was responsible for designing the transition bond in DBJ. So maybe around the 2021 to 2022, we first tried to quantify the impact of transition assets among the decarbonization-related assets as a whole. But I think it was a little bit difficult for us at that time because there are several challenges for a quantification of the impact of transition assets. The one is that we tried to we created a matrix, and we tried to map each assets in the decarbonization portfolio as a whole. But I think it is a little bit hard task for us because one of the reasons is that it is hard to quantify the replacement timeline of each asset. I mean, the asset-based life cycle is very difficult to define or to capture for financial institutions because we are having the multiple kind of assets across the sector. So it is very hard to define what kind of assets are having the future pathway in the decarbonization the strategy in each company. And another challenge is to calculate or estimate of opportunity cost, unless the client invests in the transition assets, transition project. I mean, the opportunity cost, it covers a lot of things and a lot of scenario, including of course, the hidden cost of delayed investment in transition projects, or the carbon tax or penalty if the company doesn't decide to do the transition projects, it is a very hard to estimate for the financial institutions to such kind of effects. So those are very big challenge for us. And then the enabler concept is getting more popular in the transition, the finance world. So that enabler concept is, roughly speaking, it mainly relies on the client's the transition policy or transition strategy, which is reviewed by the external review provider. So we avoid that greenwashing, of course, and but at the same time, we avoid delaying the supporting in transition sector. And at the same time, the Japanese government is planning to issue the GX Japanese government bond. So we decided to adopt the concept of the enabler at that time. But however, almost the 5 or 6 years passed, the investors' recognition is changing, and the recognition of the transition bond is becoming mature. So my sense is that the enabler concept is, of course, is not so bad, but it is not enough at the current situation. So I mean, the investors are getting more paying attention, more attention to issuers' own strategy and issuers' own commitment, even if it is a financial institution. So that's why we would like to improve our framework from the standpoint of issuers' own strategy and issuers' own commitment, including the transition assets. That is that is the one of our challenges, but it is essential part to acquire the investors' confidence more.
And looking forward, as you're sort of taking into account, a little bit of a deeper dive, perhaps into sort of the issuer's pathway going forward. I mean, what are your prospects for DBJ? How is it that you're actually thinking about what new bond issuances look like? And is that something that you're inspiring the corporates? How is it that you're inspiring the corporates to actually build up that volume and share that information more freely?
Yeah, actually, we are having 3 objectives that in order to expand our issuance of transition bond. The first is we have to prioritize the projects and technologies which are related to the transition assets, because there are a lot of the kind of assets, the related transition assets, and the technologies are also varied in the transition world. So we need to prioritize what kind of assets or what kind of technologies are getting more popular in transition space. And the second one is assessment of clients' projects with or without the review from the external reviewer. So I heard from the several corporates, they say that sometimes they are struggling with the space of the budget, the paying to the external reviewer. The cost matters, but I think it's for the credibility, some kind of the reviewer is essential. So some participants should pay for that. So if the corporates don't want to pay for that financial institutions need the responsibility to evaluate such a credibility instead. So that's the second challenges that we are facing. And the third one is at the portfolio objective. We would like to clarify the portfolio objective towards the 2030 interim targets and the 2050 the final goals. That is that needs a clear pathway in the portfolio level in financial institutions like us.
Really, really helpful. And maybe Shunsuke-san and Justine, I can come to you from a more of an investor perspective. So, more, practical. How is it that actually you're seeing the expectations for transition bonds going forward? The word mature came up. That it's a maturing part of the segment of an asset class. Is that what you're seeing? And does that mean that there's more sophistication from an investor point of view?
Yeah, may I take first? Yeah, first of all, the expansion, what is needed for the expansion of the transition bond market in Japan is that first of all, the pension fund has not invested in the transition bond space. That because the pension fund has a fiduciary mandate that prioritize only the financial returns. And we understand that, the transition finance, they contribute to reducing the systemic risk over the long term. But qualifying these benefits remains difficult. And, the framework is still evolving globally. And I think that this is some kind of if the Japan and the UK, the collaboration solve the problem, that's may be very, very helpful for expanding the markets. And another point is the diversification of the product. Almost all the Japanese transition bond is issued on the format of the senior bond. But there's the other type of the bonds, the subordinated bond, the hybrid bond in Japan. That kind of the many products enhance the yield and enhance the participants of the investment. So that's those two, the big factor to boost the market from the investor perspective.
Great. Justine?
Yeah, I'll expand a bit on that point, the domestic side being sort of slow to respond to this. I mean, that is the inflection point from the Japanese case where issuers need to get that price, right? They need to get if I'm going to go and spend for the second party opinion or the, additional work to label my bond, then, there's got to be favorable costs here. And that will come when the investors realize the role that they play in the overall success of what GX is. GX is unbelievable. This is what you want every government to do. And it's not just setting the policy per se, it's all the architecture that's gone into it. Having the bond program, having the acceleration agency that helps with the catalytic effects in the market, and having, the international collaborations and through the hubs. And then finally with the ETS. This is exactly what and that ETS is going to be generating lots of emission data over time. I mean, sure, we all may have our criticisms about perfection, that it should be day one, but it's putting in the building blocks. And there are no other country that has done it to the extent that Japan has done. And from an investor perspective, I think that's where the maybe disconnect is, that the government's put something out so with the promotion and everything around it, the integration of that into the market has not quite got there yet. So you turn to the international community and you say, well, hold on, we've got the SFDR now with Article 7. We've got large corporates that are able to issue in hard currency, so maybe now there is a home and a discussion. As saying with some of the government stakeholders, consider other currencies. We saw the resilience bond in euro had huge demand. We need to see a JCTB in dollar a euro, because believe me, there will be buyers for that. So there are ways in which we can start to see some movement in capital, but there are definitely on the investor side more education, framing it in a risk lens and their role. And then tapping some of the international capital, and with the UK transition finance work, I think that's going to really open up the UK buyers into the Japan case. So yeah,
we got some fingers crossed in the front row, so we're all hoping for that as well. What I was hoping is that we could start with Naoki-san and move along to say, what can we leave this audience with in terms of some of the actions that they should be thinking about participating in order to create the momentum. You know, I think we all agree that the Japanese market has done incredible work creating the building blocks that are needed in order to be able to really define this space, be able to actually think about what GX means and really take that to the rest of the world. So we have an audience who can help facilitate the reality of that, the implementation. How might each of you actually leave something for our audience as to what actions you should be looking for and what they could think about participating in? Naoki-san.
Yeah, in that context, we are very looking forward to for the audience, including European and the UK people, to understand the Japanese context, which confronting the changing the global trends. I mean, the Japanese people and the Japanese economy are facing the various challenges currently. The one is of course, the progress of decarbonization, and also we are facing the dramatical changes in the national security and energy security, and also one of the problems that Japanese economies is facing is the international competitiveness under the weaker yen situation. But I think that Japan context is very similar to the UK and the European countries' context they are facing. So I think it is easier for you to understand the analogy of the Japan and the UK and the European countries facing. So I mean, we usually look at the opportunities for investment in the local area in the UK and the European countries. Even in those countries, they are growing the opportunities for transition investment in energy sector and infrastructure sector. Some Japanese companies in London, in the European countries, say that they turn to interest into transition, the energy source like ammonia and something like that again. I think that the current trend is very positive to support our transition promotion. And also, even the CCUS, some projects related to a CCUS are already scaled up in the UK, based on the plenty of the UK government support. And also some the biofuel, the power source is planned to be used for data centers backup the power source. I think it's a very interesting trend. So I think that analogy is very helpful for you to understand the current position of Japan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to come to Shinsuke-san and Justine. If we could have your answers be quite quick, because then we don't want to take anything more from the next panel. Shinsuke-san.
Okay. I would like to do two things. The first of all, the Naoki-san mentioned that the cost of the transition finance, but I do believe the merit of the transition finance will exceed the cost. The key function of the transition finance is engagement with the issuer and investor. And I would like to introduce one interesting example of the engagement. The Chugoku Electric Power Company, the Iomori-san mentioned at the previous slide, the company they aim to enhance the corporate value by implementing the engagement cycle that channels investor feedback into internal improvements and reforms. They will also utilize the feedback to enhance disclosure. We, the fixed income investor, have not had some kind of the voting rights. But our feedback will have some impact on the operation. That's the good, very good tool of the transition finance. And very briefly, I would like to share my thoughts and comments on the future of the Japanese transition finance. I understand
if it
that
can be quite quick.
yeah,
because
quick. Yeah.
That sounds like a big
Yeah.
topic to me.
Yeah. 5 things to boost.
I don't think we're going to get through 5 things.
Yeah.
So if you want to hear
Yeah.
the 5 things, come see Shinsuke-san afterwards.
The network. Yeah. The geographical
Got to leave something behind.
AI, and the horizon after the declaration of the net zero society, and the nuclear, and now the Japanese government going on the corporate bond reforms. That's 5 the key factors will accelerate the transition bond market in Japan.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Super
Just-
quick. In essence of the title, great exchange between UK and Japan, and the investment flows could be big. It's very similar strategies in terms of thinking, so very much looking forward to seeing that unfold in the decade ahead.
Fantastic. I promised you an expert panel, and I will leave you with a piece of data, which says that actually Japan, for every dollar spent on physical risk transition, there is a $9 return. That is on the last CDP report, specifically for Japan. So, 9 times return on your efforts. That seems like a pretty good return to me. So again, all of this is in aid of not only doing better for people and planet, but also for profit. So I'll leave it at that. Please join me in thanking my panelists.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Let's move on to our expert panel number 2, supporting the transition of emerging economies. So I'd like to welcome our panelists and the moderator to the stage, please. Thank you very much. So the moderator on the end here, please. So likewise, thank you all very much for taking the time. Ishikawa-san from MUFG Bank, thank you. Onitsuka-san, we heard from you earlier. Thank you again for taking the time. Daisy Streetfield from 91, member of the EMDE, Investor Task Force. And Ella from Nomura Holdings, and then Jennifer Wu from City of London. Thank you all very much. So with that, I hand over to the panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I found the previous panel incredibly interesting, and I felt like it could also go on for another 30 minutes. Really, the moderator did a good job, so I'm going to try my best, because I also have a group of experts who have lots of opinions to offer on this really interesting topic. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this topic is important for the UK as well as for Japan. And the panel is going to be broken into about 3 parts. We'll do our best, right? So first of all, I represent the City of London Corporation. We house the Transition Finance Council, whom you've heard about from Vanessa just a little earlier. We're very proud of the sustainable finance work we do. If you look at the 3 policy principles that really underline everything that we do on sustainable finance, it is energy security, economic efficiency, and environmental resilience. And as a result of that, transition finance really sits at the heart of what we do when it comes to innovation, financing, international promotion. It's important to the UK because we have capital allocators from all over the world and domestically coming to London looking for ways to channel their capital to accelerate transition, looking for ways to invest in the future. We also have corporates who come to London trying to get access to risk capital at different scales. and then also options for them to de-risk their projects or business operations. So I think London is unique in a sense that we have buyers and sellers, supply and demand coming to us. And it's not really just about the pure green. A lot of the conversations is around how could we focus on the part whereby needs a lot of financing, but it's also quite vague, whereas to what constitutes good versus what is probably not so good. I think another reason why it's important to the UK is because we have the legal obligations to get to net zero, right? So it's not only important to decarbonize our domestic economy, but we also need to be partnering with our partners, friends across the world to decarbonize our entire supply chain. I think the same could almost be said to our friend in Japan, whereby they have done a phenomenal job really focusing on be it GXA or a series of policies to look at ways to decarbonize their industries and domestic economies. But more importantly, they are also branching out, taking their expertise to other countries. So, and I think, we saw in the Japan example whereby public sector and private sector really come together, and this is how you could turn ambition into action, right? And we're trying to do the same in the UK as well. And that's really important because we were chatting just a little earlier. Some would say that the low-hanging fruits have already been taken. If we look at the last 10 years in the case, especially it relates to energy transition. We face two big challenges. One is hard-to-abate sectors, which has been mentioned so many times this year. That is cement, steel, chemicals, heavy trucking, aviation, you name it, where commercially viable technologies are not really readily available comparing to, say, solar, wind, etc. The other big challenge we have is in emerging markets. Funnily enough, they are very interlinked because emerging markets, developing economies, most often their economic growth depend on these heavy industries, and some of them actually rely on fossil fuel production. We, both Japan and the UK, need to decarbonize our entire value chain. We need to partner with other countries to get to the net zero or neutrality goal. So the challenge that I'm going to pose to our panel today is how do we bring our respective expertise and experiences together to try to find ways to accelerate that in emerging market. I'm going to break this panel discussion into three parts, as I mentioned earlier. The first part, we're going to focusing more around policy framework and then public-private partnership. The second part, I really want us to get into concrete market options and solutions that we could potentially offer for you to take away. And then this final section is going to be call to action. So if I can start with Onisaka-san, maybe, on the first topic, could you maybe offer some of the recent approaches that you are already considering from a METI perspective to potentially export a lot of the good learnings and expertise into Asian or emerging markets more broadly, and maybe highlight the joint study that METI has done with ADB, my former employer, actually.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. And actually, last year, we established working group how to promote transitional finance in the Asian market. And we gathered experts from banks, investors, and also business entities and public financial institutions. And we discussed how we can promote this concept in the Asian market. And one of the insights we got is that maybe it's very difficult to directly apply the same approach we take in Japan to in the Asian market. Well, as I introduced, we take a four-step approach based on economic standards and applying to the engagement guidelines or the sectoral roadmaps. But those approaches might be not possible in the Asian market. But there are several reasons. Well, first, in Japan, when we discuss transitional finance, we think about corporate finance, which targeted to the big entities which can issue corporate bonds. But when we think about how we can evolve in the Asian transitional finance, the main target might be project finance and not bond, but loans or equities. So what can be formed as a transitional finance in the terms of loans or equity might be different from what we learn from the e-commerce principles. So that is the one reason. And the other reason is that the ESG leveled finance market is is still under development in the Asia market. Well, in Japan, we have certain labeled bond markets, but in the emerging economy, if we stick to the labeled market, we will miss a huge opportunity there. So maybe we think we need to think more broadly about transition finance, including non-labeled finance. And also the other part is that maybe it's too tough to put all the responsibility to the issuers or the entities to secure the credibility of transition, because transition cannot be done by the entities, but they need involvement of the government or local government and also financial institutions. So the systemic transition is necessary, and the credibility of transition should not be only on the business entity, but should be also on the country or financial institutions. And so from that perspective, we focus on the role of the nations, countries. They need to formulate the NDC, but and also the roadmaps or pathways, how as a whole country, they can reach to the carbon neutrality. So they need a transition pathway as a whole country. And so the systemic approach is necessary to ensure the credibility of the transition finance in the Asian market or emerging economy. That is one point we emphasize in this working group. And the other point is that maybe it's important to focus on the follow-up and monitoring, because the situation is very uncertain in the global market, and the transition journey is a long-term journey, and the things can be changed. So if we want to erase the risk in advance, it is impossible. So it is necessary to focus more on the follow-up and monitoring after making investment, and check whether the pathway is going as expected or not, and what is the reason of the deviation. So those are the points we discussed, and maybe from this perspective, maybe we need a different approach in the emerging economy. And actually, Ishikawa-san has also joined this working group, so maybe he may have some comments about that.
Yeah, Ishikawa-san, can you share some thoughts on the working group?
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here. So Onizuka-san said I was part of this working group discussing the transition finance for emerging economies. I think many of us joined this working group. We were thinking, when we think about emerging economies, we're mainly thinking about Asia. Of course, it's not just about Asia. To some extent, this recipe can be applied in other emerging economies, but given the proximity, we were, I guess, contemplating Asia as a scope when it comes to emerging. How do we apply this Japan's transition approach to emerging economies? So it's about Asia. For us as a group, we have extensive footprint across ASEAN countries now. It's an open secret, but we are probably the #1 largest ASEAN bank. I'm not going to compare with whom, but we have extensive footprint, and so that's why ASEAN decarbonization is our business. This is not value-based. This is not we're doing this for the world. It's in our interest. If ASEAN is not decarbonized, we will not achieve our net zero goal as well. So to some extent, there's that skin in the game, and that's why it's very important that we contributed. I remember, Onizuka-san, the first session we had, I was asked to present. So what I said was, let's not talk about what is transition, but why transition. That's more important. If I may be honest, who cares what is transition? Because the economy, you said, Onizuka-san, it's a system-level transition. So I don't want to see like Japan or ASEAN, 20% transitioned, 80% left. Is that a successful transition? No. So it's the entire system, entire economy. Same thing for Europe, right? Europe transitioned, Asia didn't. Is that a success? No. So it's the entire system that has to transition. That was the rationale, or that was basically the presentation I made. So whether you call it transition or not, that's a different story. I know some of you want a label product. I get it. But if you're looking at this label product only and say, okay, who cares about this 80% who's left behind? It's okay. It's not okay, right? It's not okay that 80% or 20%, whatever, is left behind, and you enabled small part of or small piece of economy or system transition. So how do we encourage the system level transition was exactly the concept of this paper that the METI and of course with JFSA and the Ministry of Environment put together. So that was the underlying philosophy. It's not just about cherry picking, but how do we encourage the system level transition? It's easy to say, it's very difficult to actually execute because people will say, what about greenwashing, right? What about stranded assets? So it's really about the balancing both the system level transition that we have to achieve, but at the same time, how do we create this integrity, robustness when it comes to transition finance? And I'm happy to come back to this, but my time is, I guess, running out, so maybe I'll stop there for now. But
no, that's a very interesting perspective. Thank you for sharing. I love especially what you both mentioned, like it's system-wide transformation, right? That's the most important thing. I think that actually went into a lot of the thinking behind the initiatives that I know Daisy has been heavily involved in all UK-related transition finance initiatives, including the Transition Finance Council, and 91 also co-chairs the Emerging Market Developing Economies Investor Task Force. It's quite a bit of a mouthful. I think a lot of our thinking was really around how do you identify companies at basically companies entity levels who are transitioning. They may not actually issue a label bond, right? But they are spending capex, doing research, trying to get capital into making them more, basically helping them to transition. So how do we identify those companies? And I think one of the challenges that we face, especially for institutional investors here in the UK and elsewhere, is that you do face some of the issues that you highlighted, where data transparency is not really there. But then also, like, there are many different definitions of what transition looks like. It's quite hard to compare one cement company in some parts of Asia to a cement company here in Europe to be able to say, okay, what is like the minimum set of criteria that we actually all need to adhere to in order to be able to say that this company is credible with its transition plan. So a lot of the work that the UK Transition Finance Council has really got into that, trying to figure out, I hate saying this, but it is a set of criteria that, as you heard from Vanessa, that could help us to identify a pool of companies that's worth investing, that can show credibility. But I want to invite you, Daisy, to maybe share some reflections on some of the work that we've done on Transition Finance Council, but then also, I guess, the vision and the work plan from an EMD Investor Task Force standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, and really great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And so for those of you who don't know 91, we are a global asset manager. We manage around $200 billion, but we are unusual as a global manager in that we have the majority, around 60% of our assets under management are invested in emerging markets. And therefore, the issue of how do we mobilize capital for emerging markets and addressing those challenges is dear to our hearts. We are also strong supporters of transition. The world needs to transition to a net zero economy, and that requires capital. So we are strategically focused on that issue, which is why we are involved in so many of the efforts around that. And as you said, the Transition Finance Council has done excellent work in terms of developing those guidelines, those guardrails for us to really be able to identify credible transition investments. And I think it's one of the sort of challenges and barriers is that many of our clients, asset owners, those with the capital, they want, in theory, to support this, but they don't feel very confident in explaining to their beneficiaries why they are invested in a very high carbon cement company, or even more, utility that's still running on gas, or any of these things. So being able to provide that set of guidelines, and that provides the confidence to invest is really important. And we've effectively been front-running those in our emerging market transition debt strategy, but it's been a real journey with asset owners and those that have that capital, while there wasn't and isn't a kind of recognized global standard, because everyone is trying to work out their set of guidelines. So if we can have one set, or at least an interoperable set globally, that can both recognize that context for emerging markets, that transition will look a little different, that system, that transition will happen in every country is a little different, but provides that minimum set of criteria to really allow that credibility. That's why we've felt it was really important to be part of the Transition Finance Council work. But there is a first order problem that we also have, which is not just transition being a challenging thing for investors to understand and be confident to invest in, but actually emerging markets as a whole. Now, that's not so true now of the well-developed sort of listed companies in, you know, Korea, Taiwan, and other things that still technically count as emerging markets. But it's very true in our home region of Africa, and many countries are virtually uninvestable, certainly in the private market space for many asset owners, particularly in the UK, who have traditionally been more conservative than some of our sort of pension funds, insurers in other countries. And so we've been involved in the UK Emerging Market Investor Task Force, which was set up as a collaboration between the government, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, Treasury, importantly, and industry, and we're delighted to be co-chairing that. My CEO co-chairs. But I think the key, and again, this speaks to the sort of system required, is that it involves all parts of the supply side of the investment value chain, if you like. So asset owners, asset managers, banks, credit rating agencies, the regulators, government, all involved in, I'm probably missing a few in there too, but all kind of trying to understand the various barriers that exist to being able to invest in emerging markets, particularly in private markets, and how do we address those issues. So without delivering you a spiel, which will probably take 2 hours on what the task force is doing, it's a lot about asset owner knowledge, information, understanding, and familiarity with those markets, those structures, those products. It's about a feedback loop on the kind of design of investment products, so they meet the needs in terms of risk, liquidity, how, jurisdiction in which they operate from, et cetera, and also data to address this risk perception issue, because there is a higher risk perception than the real risk. You are, in fact, fairly well remunerated if you invest in private markets and in emerging markets, because the perception of risk means the cost of capital is higher. So addressing that kind of data, that evidence of the track record of transactions, which started with the World Bank and GEMS releasing data in the MDBs, but now we're moving to private transactions as well to surface that data and information. And that feeds the credit rating agencies to be able to fairly assess the products and give them ratings that really reflect the true risk, because they have the data, and similarly regulators being able to apply the appropriate capital charges and risk weightings within regulations. So it's a full set of the kind of different barriers to that ability to invest in emerging markets, and ultimately to be able to support those transition investments based on something like the guidelines going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Before we go into the second part of the panel, maybe just one more follow-on question for you, Onitsuka-san. I think we all recognize that it is actually really hard for all countries, especially in emerging market with the energy crisis. And people talk about priority, right? Like, it's probably more important to survive than thinking about green transition, et cetera. Is there any follow-on work from the group to look at potentially, you mentioned how it's not just about the corporates, it's also about government, right? In terms of providing capacity building or doing just more work to support their policies such that it's making sure that it's sustainable, right? That it can actually live through all of these volatile times. Any comments that you want to offer on that?
Yes, so what is important is that making cases, and actually we have been discussing with ADB, and that we may conduct case study, what will be the typical transition finance cases in emerging market. For example, the gas-fired power plants, or waste energy power plants, or the gas grid, or those cases, we are discussing what will be the challenges from the regulatory perspective, or what is the challenges from the financial perspectives. And so we are compiling a report in this autumn to discuss what will be the issues to be tackled, not only by the entity, but also by the government, and also from financial institutions, and maybe the MDBs or public financial institutions. So that is a follow-up exercise we are making.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm sure we're going to talk about MDBs in the next section as well. So moving on to markets, this is what gets me very excited. Thank you very much, Ella, for being really patient. Would love to hear about, from Nomura's perspective, what kind of innovation, be it financial instruments, mechanisms, or products even, that has really resulted in true impact, be it in emerging market directly or tangentially, that we could potentially learn something from. And is that the kind of innovation that you see potentially that there is an opportunity for, say, UK and Japan to collaborate on?
Sure, thank you. I'll bring an example. Works, right? Bring an example of an issuance where Nomura was a joint lead manager, and it's not actually a developing market. It is Korea, South Korea, so it is a developed market. But I think it was an interesting transaction. It happened took place in November last year, and it was the first samurai transition bond for Korean Shinhan Bank. And it was a very successful transaction in the sense it was 40 billion Japanese yen, which is roughly, I think, $260 million. And actually it was scaled by 25% because the initial plan was over 30 billion. So, and that, what Shinhan Bank is doing with this is channeling it to chemical sector, organic chemicals, because they have a number of corporate clients in the chemical sector, and it is hard-to-abate sector, and it will be used for the organic chemicals manufacturing and also for carbon capture in the process, and also for waste heat recovery. And obviously that was done under, this is METI guidelines, and it was also aligned with ECMA, and they received SPO. And so when I think about why I mentioned this transaction, when I think about it, like what made it successful, and what then kind of by extrapolation, is missing, and we'll know is missing, but what might help for to emerging market issuances. And when I think about it, there was kind of in terms of architecture of the deal. So you have credit-worthy institution, you have kind of there was investor demand to start with, right? So and you also had so that is. Clearly is what we were discussing before, right? So there is well-functioning capital market, there is credit-worthy institution coming to that market, there's recognized framework which is there, and there is that generates demand. What is missing then in the obviously in the emerging markets case, and where I think that's where MDBs could come into, and development DFIs. So that's also state role is how you can remove the risks which are not acceptable to institutional investors when it comes from emerging market issuers. The second element which I think was critical there was this framework, and there was METI has pathways, sectoral pathways, and this bond obviously the use of proceeds is following those pathways. And we discussed it with Onitsuka-san just before this, right? So, okay, you have, even if you have international standard or kind of interoperable standards, still pathway will be regional or even country specific. So what is it then? Then it kind of comes back again, well, this is the role of governments in these geographies, and probably they need to be assisted in some way, but to develop those pathways, because even if you have international standard, then still you can't necessarily apply it to that geography, so that framework credibility, right? So which is I think is missing when we talk about. And the last one is, and it comes again to, we discuss here labeled versus unlabeled. I think it is about kind of credibility and rigor of what is it you're trying to achieve, what this say transition labeled or non-labeled product is going to achieve, what are the outcomes, right? And that is again a question. Does it have to be labeled, or does it have to be well, in this case, so we had an SPO, the Shinhan Bank had an SPO. There is certain indicators which obviously, that could be SPO'd. And then what do you have it in the case of emerging markets? Should there be help? Say METI had these cases, right? You had in the beginning when you started issuing transition bonds, or domestic corporates started issuing, you had model cases where you assisted them with finding kind of SPO, with securing SPOs. So it was co-funded, right? So is this done where I do not know the answer to this, but is it the governments? Is it the developmental, is it again kind of international community support, where it can come to how the local issuers could be supported in emerging markets? So that is, I think, where I see. I don't think I have solutions right now.
No, these are really interesting insights. Thank you. Ishikawa-san, congratulations on becoming #1. You definitely a lot of interesting lessons learned, and in that. So same question to you.
What's really challenging, especially for emerging economies, let's say ASEAN for now, is, of course, there are a number of listed companies. But if you ask government or central bank in these economies, they will say it's the SMEs. It's not just big corporates, that have to transition, of course. But what about SMEs? How are we going to support their transition? So I think the concept here is, of course, Japan and I'm sure UK as well, we've been talking about transition for the last 3, 4, 5 years. I think the concept we need is growth enabling orderly transition. That has to be the kind of redefine the definition of transition. Rather than just transition to any destination, I think it has to be growth oriented and also orderly transition. That's what you need. So that's why, as I said earlier, you don't want like 3 listed companies transitioned and all the SMEs left behind. So how do you finance transition of SMEs? Unfortunately, it's not about listed equity or listed bonds. It's mainly the banks who can support their transition. So that's where, of course, transition plan is important. Credibility is important, but if you ask them, your plan is not good, it's not fancy enough, it's not sexy enough, then they don't get transition, right? They don't get transition finance. So that's why it has to be, I guess, for the listed large corporates, then you can apply the rigor. But at the same time, for the SMEs, I don't think you can just apply the same principle to these SMEs. So that's number one principle. You have to be flexible. Second, I was in Asia 2-3 weeks ago, and I had a number of meetings with the government, but also the corporates. We, the banks, but also the government officials, we always talk about scaling transition finance. Fine, of course, scaling is important. But for them, it's not about scaling. It's about cost of funding, right? And what I heard from a ASEAN country government official was, how come you, MUFG, you finance AI data center in US, in Japan, Germany, France, blah, blah, blah. And how come all of a sudden you finance, let's say, Thailand or Indonesia? All of a sudden you're charging higher when the actual CO2 reduction is pretty much the same. So I think this is where this decarbonization agenda versus our risk appetite is misaligned, right? Maybe to some extent CO2 reduction could be the same impact. But for us as a lender, we cannot just say, Indonesia or Germany, it doesn't matter where it is, we can charge the same interest rate. It doesn't work that way. So how do you actually price the pure financial risk, but at the same time incorporate this transition or transitionality? That's the challenge. And of course, sustainability-linked loans and all these product offerings that we have, we're trying to address that. But it's not easy. It's not easy because for corporates that are in the emerging economies, they will tell you, hey, it's also about the funding cost. So collectively, what our responsibility is to create this scale, because as the more supply, the funding cost will go lower. That's what you learn in day 1 of economics courses. So that's what we have to do. I don't think just doing 1 transaction, 2 transactions will help. It's more supply that will enable these corporates and government to raise fund at the lower cost. So those are some of the reflection that I have as a result of all the engagement, but also trying to come up with some solution for the emerging economies, government, but also corporates. So SMEs, but also funding costs.
Fantastic, really interesting, thank you. I think it echoes the previous panel as well. I think the gentleman from Manulife also mentioned how this could be a really interesting point of collaboration between the UK and Japan to try to quantify the long-term benefits of transition, right? Such that it's accurately, hopefully, priced into bonds and all of the other things so that, the buyers can decide. So that's a really interesting topic. Daisy, coming to you. Market innovation, what's worked, what's not worked, what would you like to see to accelerate more finance into emerging markets?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting and positive sort of feedback loop going on with sort of learning from what is needed from the supply side, asset owners, what they are looking for, how they need to have kind of risk managed liquidity, et cetera, through to the products that are now being developed by asset managers like ourselves, and to the more innovative structures in terms of blended finance. A lot of work going on across the MDBs through things like the World Bank Private Sector Innovation Lab and others to really try and crack the issues that are not one size fits all. When you're looking at we can finance very easily with absolutely no blending whatsoever, projects in Brazil or in India. But yes, in other cases that, for smaller companies, less creditworthy, in countries where creditworthiness is a challenge, we are, of course, going to need those blended structures. And I think that's one thing that we would say there is more room. There's a huge number of varieties of risk mitigation, concessionality, guarantees now available through DFIs and MDBs, but it is not anywhere near at the scale or the ease of access that is needed for commercial organizations. So we have a bit of a mismatch in terms of what is currently being provided in terms of those concessional instruments and the effort it takes as an asset manager who's gone through this a number of times to actually access that capital, have it at scale for the trillions we need for financing the transition in emerging markets. But I also think being really disciplined about where actually you don't need any of that risk mitigation and there are commercial opportunities. And then it's really about doing the work with our clients to provide them the information, the data on those opportunities, and to structure the products effectively, which I think we are learning now what works. We had an interesting example in our own transition debt fund where we thought we were solving a liquidity problem by having it as a public-private blend. It solved the liquidity problem for pension funds. It caused them a big headache in terms of where that capital was going to come from in their strategic asset allocation, because it was private markets and public markets together, which seemed to be an incredibly difficult challenge for them to solve, from which member of staff to send to the meeting about the fund. So I think it is a learning process of kind of solving those problems, those challenges, those requirements of the providers of capital at scale, the asset owners. But I think we're on a positive journey in some of those innovations and learning kind of what works. But it is a challenge when what you need is different in the different markets and for the different types of company, different types of technology you might be financing.
I sympathize with that, having just come from an asset management firm whereby you deal with asset allocation issues and try to figure out where you can fit different products into the portfolio is really quite challenging. I don't know if Ishikawa-san or Ella, do you have any additional comments on this whole idea of, I think some people say that MDBs are must-haves, especially in emerging markets. Some say, well, they are sometimes more of a nuance as opposed to being helpful. Do you think, like in transition finance specifically, especially if we're looking at system-wide transformation, what else would you like them to play in terms of like roles differently, innovation, et cetera?
So you only have 5 minutes, so I guess I need to speak faster. But the World Bank actually is very innovative. The first swap transaction they did 50 years ago was the World Bank. It was not MEFG, unfortunately. It was, I think, with Morgan Stanley. But anyways, they can be innovative, right? I think what they're missing is capital, right? And we spoke to Ajay Banga in the private sector investment lab. This is public, but we are part of that lab, talking to Ajay, and Mark Carney was there as well. He's doing something else now. But anyways, they need to also cherry pick. But we shouldn't be cherry picking, right? The World Bank and ADB, they need to say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. All of these transactions, again, this is systemic transition that we need. So maybe this is the last question that you were going to ask, but what would I want to see UK as the G20 presidency next year? Double the MDB's capital. Why not, right?
It's a very clear call to action.
Maybe triple, but that's an easy solution.
Thank you.
I know politically difficult, but
we can always hope. Okay, thank you so much. So on that, I'm going to ask Onitsuka-san, 1 minute. What message would you like to send to those that are going into G20 next year?
Yeah, so I think the important thing is not to politicize this agenda, because G20, G7 COP can be a very political arena, and if the transition finance is a political agenda, it's not possible to be agreed. So the important thing is to make cases and make concrete examples on where is the demand and what kind of project we can make. And I think they are growing interest in the emerging market. And actually, in Japan, there are a lot of transition finance products and transition finance experiences. And also in Korea, there are examples of Shinhan Bank and also BII from British Public Financial Institution. They are also supporting the South African financial institution for transition finance. So there are cases growing. So the important thing is to make cases.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Daisy?
So on this theme of MDBs, I think structurally they were not set up for mobilization of capital from asset owners. They were set up to deliver against country-led objectives. And therefore their structures, their incentives in terms of how staff are remunerated are not on that basis. And so there needs to be a kind of flip of the face towards asset owners if we're really going to be able to do that at scale. Ideally not using any of their capital, using all of their other skills. One of their key skills is that they have links to government, knowledge of local markets that they can provide to the private sector who don't have boots on the ground. That's not about their capital being deployed, that's about their knowledge, their data, their information. So I think really flipping the lens so it's that idea of mobilization of scale capital for transition and sustainable growth is key. And I think but it does require a bit of a rewiring. So I think that would be, I'm sure, a political agenda, but it would be a real win to have that incentive structure and structure of how they operate being turned towards mobilization of capital.
Fantastic. Doubling down on reducing fragmentation in the MDB worlds and then also scaling. Ella, you've got the final word. What would you like G20 to be focusing?
I think there is lots to learn from successful precedents, and I think looking again at what Japan and METI have done, and also, say, UK TPT disclosure standards, there's quite a lot to learn, and whether it can be scaled globally or used as a kind of global learning material. That's I would like that to happen.
Well, thank you so much. I can see that we're at time. So thank you so much for this very, very interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to hand over to the next panel. All right, thank you.
Right. Almost in the right.
All right. Okay, well, now for the last panel session today. My name is Ben Caldecott. I'm based at the University of Oxford, and I'll be chairing this discussion, which is really reflecting on a year of progress between the UK and Japan on transition plans and transition planning. So there was a UK-Japan transition planning dialogue that began about a year ago, and this was where UK and Japanese policymakers, practitioners, financial institutions have been coming together to talk about, to share experiences, compare notes in relation to best practices and how they can together advance the agenda on transition plans, transition planning, and also, of course, how that relates to transition finance. And this has been convened, this process has been convened jointly by ITPN, the International Transition Plan Network, FinCity Tokyo, and the University of Oxford. And we held sessions in Tokyo and in London over that 12-month period. All the participants here on the panel have been part of this. So some of the topics that were covered included disclosure frameworks, sector pathways underpinning credible transition plans, how to integrate transition plans into investment and lending decisions, how transition plans can be used as part of stewardship and engagement, and also critically the use in prudential supervision of transition plans. And clearly, as has been discussed already, and as we'll continue to discuss, the UK and Japan, there's a lot of momentum on these issues, and they're together building, or can together do more to build this emerging architecture, and that's very exciting. So the panel's going to kind of talk a bit about that momentum, what was learnt from that dialogue, and I'm joined by three wonderful guests who will share their experiences. So we've got Natsuo Tori, who is the Deputy Secretary General for the Japan Exchange Group and the Sustainability Committee there. We have Alicia, who is the Head of Sustainable Finance at the Financial Conduct Authority, and we have David, who is the Head of Sustainable Finance Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at the London Stock Exchange Group. So a great panel. And I have my first question, which is for Alicia, which is, can you give us an update on the introduction of UK SRS? And within that, what has the FCA kind of been emphasizing in relation to climate-related disclosure?
So I think it's always a bold move to put a regulator at the end of the day, because we're not the most exciting thing on the agenda. But I can give a partial update, which is we have put out the consultation. That is now closed. We've got all the feedback, and we are still on track to publish the final policy statement for the autumn. That is all I can say right now, because it is still something that is live. What I would, I guess, sort of point to is, I think almost everything that we've done over the last few years within the sustainability space has had such a massive amount of feedback in terms of the number of, we hold a bunch of records within the building, which is never something that you want to hold at the FCA. So we always get a huge amount of feedback on any of our consultations within this space. And it's quite a wide range of feedback, because it's from across the financial services market, all the way from activists to investors to issuers. It is going to be something that we aim to put out sort of as soon as possible. But what I keep saying to the industry is, if you have financially material risks, you should not be waiting for ISSB to be disclosing them to your investors. So I think there is something really fundamental that I keep having to remind people of, which is, you need to understand this is just about risk management. If you have fundamental large risks, those should be out there anyway. ISSB or UK SRS, which has now been endorsed within the UK, et cetera, that is unifying the language that people are using within this space. But the financially material risks should be out there, and you should at least be pointing to them in a number of different ways. So this shouldn't be a fundamental shift. It should be making sure that investors in particular have comparable information that they can look at, that it is in a way standardized, and that it is globally interoperable. I know that's a term that we've been hearing a lot, but if it's a big risk, make sure it's out there already.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you for that. David, I mean, building on that, could you say a bit about what you're doing at the London Stock Exchange Group to encourage listed companies to disclose their transition plans?
Great, thanks Ben, and thanks FinCity as well, actually, for organising today. I think there are 1,000+ different events going on across London today, but actually I think the discussion between Japan and the UK is one of the really important discussions, and there's incredible leadership in Japan, and I think there's a lot the UK can learn, and hopefully there's this cross-learning on both sides. But what maybe it's also, before just tackling your question, is just providing a bit of context. So I think most people are pretty aware on who we are, but I guess we're working across the market. And because we're also working with the investor and finance community as one of the largest leading data analytics and index companies, we can see the demand from the investor side, which means we really want to help companies be able to better access capital and better provide the data and the information that the financial community is after. So we're big supporters on this, and we've been very involved in it, from GFAN's Transition Plan Task Force to launching the ISSB technical guidance on transition plans this time last year. So we're very invested in it, very supportive. in terms of then what companies are facing, though, obviously companies that are at the moment all getting ready, geared up around CSRD reporting, obviously getting ready on ISSB as well. The guidance from the ISSB on transition plans, on one hand was very helpful. So it linked everything back to the S2 standard, explained the interconnections there. But I think it also has raised a bit of confusion with companies where they're trying to work out, well, how does this relate to our standard annual climate reporting? And so what we're trying to do there is, after quite a lot of discussion and engagement across the market, is actually advocating for transition plans as a way and encouraging companies to see them as a way to streamline their reporting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that companies are reporting on an annual basis that is not about the last year. It's the more forward-looking stuff. That can be, and a lot of that is actually quite repetitive from year to year. So it's actually worth doing that once really well as part of a strategic transition plan, producing that, and then that is also a great document for engaging the investor community and the financial community. So it can improve the engagement with the finance community, and it can be done in a way that actually reduces the overall reporting burden. So maybe we can touch on it later on, but I think that's what we're engaging companies around.
So simplification, essentially one of the arguments. Are you feeling like you have to kind of deploy other arguments as well? How this unlock, and proof points that you might have in relation to this, transition plans unlocking value or improving access to capital or stuff like that.
I guess we're kind of unusual because we've also got the other businesses. I mean, we can see like from the index business, the biggest reason why people are switching their passive portfolios, often these very large indexes which typically are weighted based on market capitalization. Typically when a pension fund selects one of those, they might be from us, they might be from one of our peers, they typically stick with that index for decades. They don't change it. Climate indexes are one of the reasons why they change. So there's a huge competition between the index providers on who can produce the best climate indexes, because that's the way to attract and shift the market and take market share. Because we see that, we're able to evidence that, I think, to the corporate community as well, which I think also adds a lot of credibility when we're trying to explain why this is important to companies.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, David. So Natsu, over to you. I mean, in a sense, a version of both of those questions that Alicia and David have answered, right? So firstly, can you tell us a bit about the strengthening of SSBJ disclosure requirements for Tokyo Stock Exchange listed companies? It'd be great to hear a bit about that. And then maybe you could say a bit about what you're doing at the Tokyo Stock Exchange also to encourage companies to disclose.
Thank you. So to answer the first question first, so like in Japan, the ISSB equivalent aligned standard, which we call SSBJ, will be mandate in the annual securities report. So like this is not a rule by the stock exchange, and it's a legal requirement introduced through the registration. And then this policy is focused on the company listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange prime market. It's because these companies are supposed to expect to have a dialogue with the global investors. And the requirement will be introduced in a phased manner, starting with the large companies by market capitalization. And the first group of company will be expected to comply from the annual securities report next year, next fiscal year, the March next year. And one point I would like to emphasize here is Alicia mentioned the materiality analysis assessment, but like the Japanese SSBJ standards also leave the company to decide what kind of information is material to the investor, which means like not so like the if that's the probably very important point, because we are moving towards the mandatory global aligned disclosure, but at the same time still preserving the company, a principle that the company need to exercise the judgment on what is truly material for investors. And what the second point, what we do in terms of considering that kind of context. So what we do at the stock exchange is there are two things, I think. One is, so like Japan Exchange Group is a holding company of the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Like we operate the equity market, and we have we set the listing rules and also like self-regulatory body. So we really, and we also like set the corporate governance code for the listed companies, and we encourage the dialogue between the investors and the corporates. So from that perspective, what we do is like supporting listed companies' disclosure efforts, and not only disclosure, but also underlining initiatives, like sustainability initiatives, like through sharing the information through the like online educational platform, or like providing guidance, as David says. There is like standards is there, but the interpretation is really, I mean, the issuers like face a big challenge of the interpretation now. And then of course the consultancy firms support listed companies, but not necessarily, like their perspective is more like a compliance, not a compliance exercise, but like quite different point of view. So what we do is more like from the corporate value creation point of view. So that's what we support. And then the second point second thing that we do is enhancing accessibility to those information. Even like the company like disclose a lot of information, if like no one really access to the information or no one uses information, there is no point. So we make it sure that accessibility to the information. That's probably answer to your second question.
That's really helpful. What I wanted to kind of move on to now is, the previous panel kind of started to talk about this as well, which is how to bring connect institutional capital to transition plans and transition planning. And I'm just wondering, particularly from a market infrastructure, stock exchange perspective, how you can improve the usability of transition plans to help that happen. And I don't know whether, David, you want to go first, and then maybe Natsuo, you could come in.
Yeah, part of it is making sure that this isn't just kind of like a bolt-on extra thing that's not connected actually to the fundamental corporate strategy. That's the kind of the key bit. And therefore, if you're going to treat it as something which is deeply strategic, it should be when the board is having their strategy day, this needs to be part of it, not a kind of a tacked-on separate kind of sustainability and climate discussion. It needs to be an integrated part of that strategic discussion. So one thing we've been doing has been working with an organisation called Chapter Zero, which it's been about engaging non-executive directors to help them step up and understand this space better. So in fact, actually just yesterday, the LSEG group chairman hosted an event during Climate Week and we invited the non-executive directors for London-listed companies and invited them to join that, to get engaged and become part of that network. And part of we have a foundation, and from the LSEG Foundation actually funded the development of a kind of a non-executive director level toolkit on transition planning, which puts things more into kind of a digestible format for NEDs, which Chapter Zero is launched. So that's kind of one piece at that level. We've also then been just trying to kind of help companies kind of get their heads around how to do this, but also how to kind of even just in terms of how we run out training around this in a consistent way with other exchanges. So we do that. We've been very keen on the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, developing kind of a standardized way of working with exchanges globally on this. So we also support them in terms of, again, some funding, but also running workshops with them for London-listed companies to help them improve their disclosure. So I guess that's on the kind of the corporate side. Then on the investor side, I think there is there's lots of different ways to assess transition plans and the data and trying to assess what is a credible transition plan. And there, we had been developing various methodologies ourselves, but actually what a lot of the asset owners said, we just don't need more different methodologies. We want some standardization and we want some academic rigor. So we actually been supporting the work of the transition plan, the TPI, the Transition Pathway Initiative at the London School of Economics. And then that's been a standardized way with lots of asset owners coming together to say we want a standardized methodology for assessing transition plans and their credibility. There's a management quality score, there's a carbon performance assessment, and then we have been actually now, people can get the data free from the London School of Economics website, but we're also now providing that as a data feed through our data analytics division and building that into the indexes that we provide. I talked about the indexes earlier. We've now got over 100 billion of assets following the indexes which use the Transition Pathway Initiative data. So, and there, I guess, the investors are able to link both their engagement with companies using that data with their investments, which are then based on companies being overweighted or underweighted based on the quality of their transition plan according to the TPI assessment.
Natsu, do you want to come in?
I think you already mentioned all the points I wanted to mention, but as I said in my first answer, in Japan, once the SSBJ is implemented, the sustainability related information transition related information will be disclosed in an integrated way with the financial in the financial report, which means if the company decide the transition related risk and opportunities are material for investors, these information will be disclosed with the company-wide strategy and also financials. So I think that is very a big kind of step in Japanese market, I think. So we encourage the company to do whole kind of company exercise, not only transition plan or a climate as a separate topic, but more an integrated way with work and for example, encourage sustainability team to work with the financial department or a corporate strategy department to actually come up with the company-wide transition plan and disclose in the financial report with the company-wide financials and strategy. And for the investor, we encourage them to use the information, as David just mentioned, disclosure is not for disclosure. Disclosure is for need to be used in the dialogue and in the engagement, in the voting. So need to be used. So we encourage the investor to use those information. And then yeah.
And I guess, we are still at a very early stage internationally in terms of the data that's available to support an analysis of transition plan quality for corporates. I sort of expect that, TPI, for example, is going to be good for some jurisdictions and some sectors. It aspires to do everything, but I suspect there's some gaps. I suspect the coverage in Japan is not as good as it could be. So, are you working with partners or thinking about how to kind of improve that ecosystem of analytics around transition plan quality? What needs to happen? What could we collaborate on, UK and Japan, on these issues?
Let me think about.
We can come back to it. And do you want to come back to it, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, please let me think about the question, because your question is a UK collaboration, how to.
So I guess my question is, the starting point is we got to improve the analytics around transition plans for corporates. And at the moment, we have TPI and we have a few other actors doing it. The depth of that analysis is probably not there. It's a start. There are going to be gaps in sectoral coverage and geographical coverage. How can we work together, not just UK and Japan, but different actors, to kind of rapidly improve the quality of the analytics? And so, as you think about that, I will sort of try and ask that question to Alicia in terms of what can regulators do to improve the quality of these analytics?
So I'm going to maybe pivot that slightly, because I worry, and recognizing that I was literally just talking about ISSB and disclosures and the importance of all of this. However, I worry a little bit about sometimes more information is not better. Because actually you can become completely overwhelmed with, just information that is out there and you might not know what to do with. And I think there is a little bit of a risk around some of this, that we're pumping more and more information out into the market, hoping that it's going to make this a clearer picture. And it is a complex picture that requires analysis and thoughtfulness and sort of analyzing it. The way I personally would view, and often actually even in Chapter 0 events have discussed, the way we would think about transition plans is an example. Let's use something geopolitically relevant. When the Strait of Hormuz was closed, I used to live in the Middle East. Anybody who has lived in that region knew that this was probably one of the big risks within the region. We all always sort of war-gamed or ran risk exercises around it. When it happened, one of the first questions I asked the team was, where would I see this? Would I see it within ISSB? Would I see this reflected in the transition plan? And actually, one of the first answers that I got was probably in ISSB, that would be backwards-looking information, so you might see something on the level of disclosure. But ideally, in the transition plan, you would see the strategic overlay of how an executive was planning to transition their business model away from having an exposure to the Strait of Hormuz. So actually, I think that's the kicker, or it should be, for executives. That is the way you show your strategic thinking for how you are going to deal with any of the challenges that, for example, might exist in the static disclosures that come out of ISSB. That is where you show your broader thinking. And I think that seeing them as two different pieces of the puzzle, I think, is really, really helpful, because what I worry about is that if you just pump more information out there, it might not actually help us in the longer term. So yeah, that's probably our current thinking. Subject to the government consultation that is happening on this and where they land.
Your personal opinion.
Personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I double down on that. I think now is an incredible opportunity, just given the crazy world that we're in, the oil shocks, the issues around energy security, the crazy weather we've got here in London at the moment, the extreme weather events. What investors at the finance sector want to understand often is, how resilient are corporate business models, and explaining those in a strategic document, and it doesn't need to be full of stats. It needs certain statistical, certain quantitative information, but it needs to set out the vision and the strategy. And I think now is the time where it's a real opportunity to double down on it and to draw those connections and draw the dots.
Sorry, I don't probably have an answer. I didn't come up with the answer to your question, but I've been thinking it's just like David mentioned, so many things happen in the world now, and the corporate facing a lot of challenges, not only the transition, but more urgent issues. And under this circumstance, who need the transition plan separately from the corporate plan? I mean, what kind of element? I've been asking to myself. I don't know. If you have any comments on my question, but I've been thinking do we who use the separate transition plan detail elements in what, when, in terms of the financial decision?
Well, so you'll be glad to know that we're nearly at time. I've been given the 1 minute warning. So we don't need to get to the bottom of that right now, although I would say that if we believe, I think we all kind of believe that transition plans should be a fundamental part of corporate strategy, right? And if it becomes a core part of corporate strategy, analysts, people valuing companies, when there's a bad transition plan, it should affect the value of the company. And if it doesn't, then we aren't doing our job. And it's not being properly integrated in corporate strategy. So I think there's a sort of a part of the resolution to that is improving data and things like TPI, but equally it's people seeing the value, market participants seeing the value. And we're going to try and do that in the UK and Japan and spread the word. Well, look, thank you, the three of you, for contributing to this short panel. The other thing I've been asked to sort of mention is that today the dialogue that I mentioned at the beginning has published a set of recommendations. So these are aimed at both the public and private sector. You should be able to see the QR code shortly, where you can download the report. Voila. And this is reflects the convener's synthesis of the stakeholder discussion. It doesn't represent the individual positions of any one participating organisation. But have a look. I think it's got some really interesting conclusions and recommendations for how we can drive forward this really important agenda, and obviously credible transition plans underpin effective transition finance. So with that, I'm going to hand over now to Tokyo Morita, the Executive Director of FinCity Tokyo. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And at the outset, I would like to thank you, Dr. Caldecott, for your great efforts in driving the UK-Japan transition planning dialogue. We appreciated very much the chance to learn from experienced practitioners and regulators from both countries, and the discussions gave us many interesting ideas to explore in the shape of the policy statement. I am most grateful for your great leadership so far. Thank you very much, Dr. Caldecott. And thank you all for very much for joining our forum today. I hope you enjoyed the discussions. As we conclude this second Transition Finance Forum, we extend our sincere thanks to Nomura International for hosting, and the GX Agency for co-organizing, and the City UK for their generous support. The key theme for this year's forum is scaling beyond borders. We have focused our steady progress that Tokyo and London have built together in transition finance, and the dual leadership our two financial cities can demonstrate to expand this approach to emerging markets. While Tokyo has a bridge to our Asian emerging country colleagues, London possesses unrivaled thought leadership capable of shaping global opinion, as evidenced by the highly successful London Climate Action Week. This complementary relationship can serve as a beacon of hope in an increasingly volatile world, demonstrating how finance can realize truly sustainable development. Our two cities share initiatives with a common purpose. By exchanging insights on these shared goals, we firmly believe we can advance sustainable finance across borders. We look forward to an even more ambitious collaboration in the coming year, particularly as the UK prepares to host the G20. To seize these opportunities, FinCity Tokyo remains fully committed to London Climate Action Week, and we hope to connect with as many of you as possible during our upcoming proportional activities. So thank you once again for coming today, and please stay in touch. If we have time, let's carry on our conversation over some drinks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And with that, we conclude today's event. We hope you have found these insights valuable and inspiring for the future. And thank you again to all of our speakers and panelists and for joining. Huge applause. Thank you. And we will now move on to the networking session, where you will be able to discuss further with our invited experts and make some valuable connections. So thank you very much again for coming. Thank you.